Guys, I'm back. I've watched up to the halfway point of Rings of Power, episode 3 and 4, so let's talk about it. If you haven't seen my first video on Rings of Power, let me just state again that I am not a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I haven't read the Silmarillion, I haven't read the books. I have seen the movies, but that was a long time ago. And I think my video made that abundantly clear. Elrond is sent to meet Lord Celebrimbor.
Lord Celebrimbor.
To the Harfoots, and these guys are actually a species of hobbits. So I'm looking at this through a different lens than a lot of other people are viewing this show or viewing it online. What I did learn is that there are a lot of passionate fans of Tolkien's works. People do really care about the lore and the canon of Lord of the Rings, and there's a reason for that, because it seems like Tolkien has developed this huge spanning universe and put a lot of care and time into it. And a lot of you weren't shy about commenting and dumping a ton of information about Lord of the Rings, and I really do appreciate that. And, you know, giving me a few corrections here and there. Seriously though, I had a lot of fun seeing what people thought about Tolkien's work and what you thought about Rings of Power. From what I saw in the slightly over 1,000 comments on my first video is that the opinions on this show on Rings of Power really do span the entire gambit. You have people who think it's meh, you have people who absolutely hate it, and you have people who say they love it. I will say that hating is far more prevalent though. And after watching episode 3 and 4, I am starting to understand why that is. Watching the show was an experiment for me because I wanted to understand how much me, a person who doesn't know the lore of Lord of the Rings, has never read any of the books, I want to see how much someone like me could enjoy it or not enjoy it. But now after watching episode 3 and 4, the veil has been pulled back. I am starting to see the errors that are inherent with this show. From my point of view, I was just wondering, does this show bring me in? Does it keep me wanting to come back for more? Am I interested to see where the story's going? Do I like the characters? Are they relatable? Now, I can point to a lot of shows that had my fat ass absolutely glued to my seat, wanting to see the next episode, even binging entire seasons. So shows like Game of Thrones, Cyberpunk Edgerunners, which I just watched in one sitting, Breaking Bad, I can go on, but you get the point. A good story, good dialogue, good characters, relatable characters, clear motives, these are all things that should be in a show that keep the viewer glued to their seat and wanting to see more. These are the things that should keep someone watching this show, regardless of if you know the canon or not. But the main problem that I have is with Galadriel, which is very unfortunate because she's the main character, and the more that we go through this, the more that I dislike her. I was kind of initially vibing with what she was doing. I mean, I know that she wanted to seek revenge against Sauron, but then we saw how badly she treated her troops, how they didn't want to go on with her, and then they eventually disband from her. Then how she jumps off a ship in the middle of the ocean. I'm still racking my brain about that one. And then in episode 3 and 4, she just acts like probably one of the most unlikable people I've ever seen in media. My chair was sliding down. She performs, frankly, ridiculous and literally unbelievable acts. And trust me, we'll talk about that later. Rings of Power simply has a problem with their main protagonist, and I hate to say that. Also, I don't like the other characters. As an honorable mention in this category, Theo, if anyone even remembers who that is. I hate Theo, I can't even put my finger on it, but this dumb oaf of a character just annoys me every time he's on screen. The character choices, the dialogue, the things that are happening genuinely confuse me in episode 3 and 4. And just a note to Amazon, hello, this is the opposite of what you want to do. As I said in my first video, the things that I liked in episode 1 and 2 was mainly Elrond and Durin. And unfortunately in episode 3 and 4, they're limited to about 15 minutes of screen time, so I had to trudge through an hour and 45 minutes of stuff that I was less interested in. But that's just an initial high overview of what I thought. Let's just get into episode 3 right now. I should state from the start that I'm going to be talking about a lot of plot points in episode 3, so spoiler warnings. I didn't mention this in my last video, but I'm going to put it in here. Spoilers. So we begin with our favorite marathon endurance swimmer, Galadriel. She's brought to Numenor. We finally get to see it. I guess. I don't know if this is really an important place because, again, I haven't read the books, but they make a big fanfare about it, and it actually does look nice. And again, I find myself talking about the visuals of this show, and they're beautiful. Numenor looks fantastic. I am a little biased because I do like kind of the coastal civilization and fantasy worlds, but that's just me. But this is where Galadriel and the castaway dude Halbrand, they get taken to the Queen of Numenor. So we all know that Galadriel wants to get back to Middle-earth. That's her whole entire goal. And the Queen, the person that they're meeting with now, is the only person that could possibly get them back. She's their only way for safe harbor back. So, okay, you're in a foreign land who's possibly adversarial towards you. How do you go about doing this? How do you get your one chance of safe passage back to where you want to go out of this land? Do you A, try to be cunning, diplomatic, charming, and try to convince her to let you back to where you want to go? Or do you B, act like a dick? Galadriel tries to find the most rude, confrontational way possible to address the Queen to try to get back to Middle-earth. Now, as expected, this doesn't go over well, and of all people, Halbrand is the one trying to calm her down, trying to give her the more diplomatic solution. He pretty much goes to her and says, hey, maybe we shouldn't try this whole being a dick thing. I mean, can't you just swim there anyway? Wasn't that what you were doing in the first place? Why did you jump in the ocean anyway? But throughout their entire time on Numenor, there is no diplomacy from Galadriel. Her bright idea of trying to get back to her people and help them is just cause more unnecessary conflict in Numenor. I obviously have a problem with this because I'm thinking in my head, even as someone who doesn't know the lore, okay, here's Galadriel, she's this wise, heroic elf who has lived for centuries. Doesn't she have some cunning? Doesn't she have some charm? Doesn't she have some diplomatic resolution in her head that she could use to convince the queen to help her? But this doesn't happen, and I was genuinely confused. I didn't understand. I mean, maybe she's supposed to be like this. Maybe she's just constantly angry. I don't think that's how her character is supposed to be. And I would argue this is a trait that you don't want to see with your main protagonist. I feel like Hollywood, whoever's writing this, they just don't know how to write strong women. They just don't. Because to them, it seems like a strong female character is one that just complains and is a dick to everyone. There is a way that you could go about this and make it interesting. You could probably still inject some drama into it. But again, I'm not being paid to write this. I'm not being paid more than every other profession in the world to write this show. They should be able to figure this out on a budget of $500 million. But seriously though, if you're going to watch these 2 episodes, take notice of Galadriel's expression throughout the 2 hours of these episodes. She's angry. Pretty much the entire time, except for one scene. So Galadriel was saved from the ocean by this guy Elendil. Please God, I really hope that I pronounced that correctly. He's the captain of the ship. He's the one person on Numenor who seems willing to help her. But what does Galadriel do? She threatens to stab him when they confront each other in an alleyway after she just escaped. And during their little encounter, she just insists on threatening him, even though he's the one person on this entire island who's been non-threatening towards her. He literally has zero harmful intent. He's just sitting there talking to her with a smile on, and she just seems so angry. But anyway, he mentions riding, and she says, did you say riding? And then they go riding on horses together. And this is the scene that I was talking about where she has a different expression. And it's a really kind of out of nowhere slow motion scene of Galadriel just riding this horse, and then it slowly pans up to her and she has this almost uncanny valley smile on it. It looks like she's forcing a smile. Probably the hardest that I've ever seen anyone try to force a smile. It was confusing. But anyway, they finish their ride and they end up at the Hall of Lore. So they start looking at all these documents, and this was another scene that was kind of confusing to me because Galadriel finds out that the sigil, the Sauron sigil that she found stamped on her brother and then in that other cave area, she finds out that it's actually a map, or at least it indicates a location. I find it slightly hard to believe that Galadriel never put this together over the centuries that she was looking for Sauron. So she had the sigil, and she was probably looking at maps while she was planning out her route to go find Sauron. I'm just surprised no one ever saw the sigil and put it up to the Southlands and match up the mountain passes. I don't know. I mean, maybe it was explained in the episode and I just passed over it, but that was confusing to me. But hey, what about our buddy Halbrand? What's he up to? He still wants nothing to do with Galadriel. He doesn't want to go on her whole revenge plot thing. He doesn't want to go find Sauron. He doesn't want to fight the orcs. He just wants to stay in Numenor. And to stay in Numenor, he wants to become a blacksmith. And as it turns out, you can't become a blacksmith unless you have this little crest, this guild crest that they all wear. So what should Halbrand do? At the time I was thinking, well, maybe he'll be an apprentice, or maybe he'll find another job, maybe he'll just give up, maybe he'll just try to find another way of living on this island. But no. So what he does is he goes to the bar, he finds these 4 guys, he gets drunk with them, he befriends them, and then he steals the guild crest off of the one guy. Of course they find out about this, and they confront him in an alleyway, and then they go to fight him. But then as it turns out, Halbrand is actually this crazy psycho badass, and he just kicks the piss out of all 4 of these guys all at once. And I have to say, this is the one fight scene that actually was kind of okay. It was decent. It didn't look too unbelievable, as we'll see with Galadriel later in episode 4. But a 4v1 fight, they actually made it look kind of decent. Like I said, I have to give credit where credit's due. It was kind of badass, but not badass enough to escape jail, because he does eventually get caught by guards and thrown in prison. Then there's this whole other thing where Galadriel finds out that Halbrand is actually heir to the throne in the Southlands, and she wants him to come back with him to the Southlands to fight the orcs and reclaim his name and redeem himself, and they could all live happily ever after. Okay, so that's what I thought about that part. But let's move on to Arondir. I forgot his name. So we get a little bit of the story. So he got captured. He's in the orc pit, and they're looking for this weapon. As it turns out, it's the hilt that dumb Theo has. A clearly evil sword that he has no business of having. But to say something positive, I do think the orcs look really cool. The makeup, the costumes that they wear. They look really good. It kind of reminds me of the movies. But something that I don't remember in the movies is the orcs getting physically harmed by the sun. Like what happens with vampires when they go into the sun and their skin burns. That's what happens to the orcs in Rings of Power. So again, someone else could say better than me because they know a hell of a lot more than I do. But I just didn't think that this was a trait that the orcs had. Another thing that I almost forgot about is the fact that the orcs seem caring to other orcs, to injured orcs. So Arondir stabs one of them with a stick in the neck, and the orcs carry him out and kind of like on this stretcher, and they all seem to be worried about him to some capacity. And I don't really remember in the movies, again, it was a long time ago, but I don't really remember in the movies where the orcs were worried about their own, worried about injured orcs on the battlefield. But either way, I have to give them credit. The orcs do look great. They look gritty and grotesque. But hey, you know who else they made look grotesque? The Harfoots. As it turns out, Harfoots are barbaric and they lack the basic capacity for empathy. So we find out that the Harfoots are moving in their caravan, their brigade. They kind of like migrate. But if you are hurt and say have a broken foot, for example, they will leave you behind. If you can't keep up, you're literally left for dead. And they explicitly state this because they have some kind of ritual, some kind of ceremony, and they all remember the people that they just left for dead. The poor bastards that were too hurt, that they were too inconvenienced to help, that died. I don't know if the Harfoots are actually like this in the canon, but it seems unbecoming of them, especially what they showed us in Rings of Power. They stick together, they work together, they watch out for each other. I just can't picture while they're on this migratory journey that they would say something like, oh, hey, Bumble butt patch, sucks that you're injured and you can't come with us on the Great Migration. Well, I guess you're gonna die. Go yourself. You know, I did like the charm of the Harfoots as we were originally introduced to them, but this new aspect of them just seems kind of off. So anyway, those are my thoughts on episode 3. I can't really find much to enjoy about it like I did in episode 1, but I would say it's mildly better than episode 2. Galadriel seems immature, and her and Halbrand are just making way more trouble for themselves than they have to in Numenor. Not much happens with Arondir in the Orc Pit, and I learned the Harfoots are actually barbaric people. But let us trudge onward, folks. Episode 4, The Great Wave. Now, I was being pretty negative for a few minutes, so let's tone it back and let's talk about something that I found positive about this episode. We're back with my favorite people of the show, people that are actually charming and enjoyable and likable, relatable. It's Elrond and Durin. Now, like I said, there isn't much here because they only get about 15 minutes of screen time, but we do see that the elves and the dwarves are working together to build the tower that Celebrimdor planned. Did I get that? Did I get that right? In the Elvish language, C has a value of K. I will never forget that. So long story short, Durin finds Mithril or God, I know I'm probably pronouncing this wrong. Mithril. Anyways, this new ore that is lighter and more durable than any other ore that they have found, and Durin is trying to mine for this. Durin and his father do have this nice little interaction, and they make up with each other, and it's great. It's all good. Now let's go back to stupid Theo. He volunteers to go find food for his people who are all in this watchtower because they all ran away from their town that was ransacked by the orcs. And for some reason, Bronwyn is in charge. I don't understand this. I don't know why she was put in charge. I don't know why there isn't just some kind of town mayor. I mean, there had to be someone who had some kind of authority in their town before, but maybe that was Bronwyn. I don't know. It's not stated. So, of course, Theo runs into orcs in their now destroyed town. And it turns out he still has this hilt, and it turns out that this is the hilt that all the orcs are looking for. This is what they're searching for. This is what they're digging for. Now here's something confusing too, and I don't know if this is in the book. So this hilt has a little prong on it, and Theo just somehow knows how to do this, by the way. He stabs himself with the sword, and then that makes the hilt grow a sword out of it. I don't get it. I don't know, how does Theo know how to do that? Anyway, he gets away, and then he goes to hide in a well. The old hiding in the well trick. It's kind of cliche at this point. And the orcs hear him, but they can't find him. Like they know he's in the well. They've heard him in there, and they just look in there, and I guess they just think it was like must have been the wind, you know, kind of like a video game, like a Splinter Cell. But anyway, Arondir just so happens to run into him, and Arondir saves him because he was freed from the camp, and I'll get into that later. But anyway, Arondir and Theo, they run through the forest, and then they're eventually saved because they get to the end of the forest, and the sunlight comes out, and all the orcs that were chasing them, they all start getting burned by the sun, and they don't dare travel any further. So Arondir, yeah, he was freed. That's how he got out of this camp, and he was freed by this guy named Adar. I don't know who he is. I don't know what he is. I'm not going to make any speculations like I did with Gandalf, because it turns out I'm probably not right about that. But he's this kind of corrupted elf, and he seems to be the father of these orcs. At least he's seen as a father figure to these orcs. So I mean, that's kind of interesting. I want to know who he is, I guess. I mean, I've never seen anything like that in Lord of the Rings, so it'll be interesting to, I guess, see what he's all about. But now, let's go back to our favorite girl with the Tempest in her, Galadriel. Now she asks for the Queen to lend her army, to lend her people, to go to the Southlands to fight for her. And she is just demanding these things. But then Galadriel pushes it a step further and says, well, I don't want to talk to you, Queen. I want to talk to someone who has some real power. I want to talk to the king. Basically insulting her. So what happens? The Queen has enough of her BS and throws her in jail. I mean, as she should. So now we're about to set in motion a series of events that is absolutely ridiculous and made me laugh several times. So Galadriel is going to get set free. They say, we're done with you. We're going to give you passage back. So she gets what she wants, I guess. But what does she do now? I'm going to explain this very carefully because it's going to be as ridiculous as it sounds. So 4 guards come to her cell. They unlock the door. Galadriel walks out. They uncuff her. And then she somehow grabs all of them and just pushes them in the cell. And then locks the door. It truly looks absurd. I genuinely can't believe that a show with this budget would leave that in or not make it more fantastical, not make her use her acrobatics, which she obviously has. We've seen her do insane moves against a troll, right? So if we're going to go with that, then why can't you have her do that against the guards? At least it would be more believable that she did some kind of crazy parkour jump off them and disoriented them and then kicked them one by one into the cell and knocked them out. But she literally pushes them. At least within the Rings of Power context, it would make it more believable if she did something like that rather than just shove them. And then the editor makes a quick cut here, and he obviously was in the editing bay and saw this and was like, whoa, 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 we can't do this. We got to hide this somehow. But it doesn't really work out because you could kind of see the guys moving in and kind of making way for each other as they're all shoved through the door. Just go, if you're going to watch anything of Rings of Power, just watch this part. But we don't stop there because now she plays Assassin's Creed and she is crawling up the tower that the king is in, and she's crawling up this 500-foot tower up a sheer wall to get into this room. I guess we could suspend our disbelief because in episode 1 we see her climbing the side of an ice mountain, but it doesn't make this scene any less ridiculous. Listen, I want Galadriel to be a badass. I'm all for it. I'm down. But when you have them doing ridiculous things like this, it kind of takes me out of it. It's kind of funny because they darken the scene. You could barely see her crawling up. It's like, well, okay, now, well, we can't have this either. We just had a ridiculous scene with a jail scene. Now you want her climbing up a 500-foot wall? It's like they had to show it, but they kind of wanted you to miss it at the same time. So she gets to the top and finds the king bedridden. He's sick. But surprise, the queen is also there. And the queen says she knows that she was coming. She knows that Galadriel was coming. So here's another question. If the queen is antagonistic towards Galadriel, why not have 20 guards there ready to capture or kill her in the event that she does make it up to the king's room because you said that she knew that she was coming? What has changed in the queen's outlook towards her? You went from throwing her in a jail cell for sedition to just shrugging that off within a matter of probably 30 minutes and saying, okay, well, yeah, now I guess you're here. Yeah, I guess you could talk to the king. I mean, I just don't understand it because they're just talking candidly to each other. And it's almost as if none of that ever happened. It's like now they want to have a conversation. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe this is something in the canon. I don't know. So anyway, there's this whole thing about visions and how she puts her hand in this one thing that's called a palantir. Probably another thing that I pronounced incorrectly. I apologize. I'm very sorry. But she could see visions by touching this thing, and she sees a great wave coming in and destroying Numenor. But the preface to that, what happens right before that, is that Galadriel shows up. So that's why the queen was all upset for her being there. I'm curious as to why they didn't take each other aside and just explain that in the beginning, but then I guess we'll have no drama. So that's what happens with this whole entire plot line. Actually, no, that's not it. Because then, as Galadriel is setting off into the sun, she finally gets her passage out of there. She finally gets on her boat to go back to Middle-earth. These petals from this tree start falling. And the queen sees it as a sign that she made a mistake and that she should actually join Galadriel and send an expeditionary force over with her to Middle-earth to go fight Sauron and the orcs. Galadriel does get her way. But this wasn't due to anything that Galadriel did. All of her arguing, all of her breaking law in a foreign land, all of her conflict, her ruckus she caused breaking out of jail, her climbing up a tower, none of that impacted anything. It's simply through happenstance, through luck, that she got what she wanted. Why should we like Galadriel? Why should we be rooting for her? Why should we take her seriously? At this point, she has failed pretty much every single time, and we're just simply going with it. And I was already out of it when she jumped in the ocean, so imagine how I feel now. But here's where I want to give my overall kind of high-level overview of this, and it is kind of an overarching problem with this entire series. Much like the drama with Galadriel and the Queen, Isildur and his dad and his friends, Halbrand and everyone on Numenor, all of these things seem to be happening just because. They seemed forced by the writing team. I feel like the writers are simply checking off boxes of conflicts and plot lines that they have to get to, and not really thinking about how they get there. We're not getting to them in a logical way, we're just causing a lot of melodrama. And all this is given a pass by some people just because it has Lord of the Rings on it. And because of this lazy writing style, making characters do illogical things to get to the plot points, it makes the characters unlikable. It makes them not relatable. You don't understand their motivation sometimes. So when they're in a moment of action or peril where they should be the hero, we just don't really care. At least that's how I feel. And it's a shame, and they're shooting themselves in the foot because I do want to know what happens. I want to know certain things in the story. I want to know how the rings are created. I want to know how the tower is going to get built. I want to know what happens with Elrond and Durin. I kind of want to know who that Andar guy is too. But then when I think about it, I realize it's all kind of gimmicky. The only thing holding this up is because people want to see what happens next through these little crumbs of mysteries that the writers are dropping to you. And sometimes it just feels like a tug of war between wanting to know what happens and having to deal with these sometimes terrible, confusing characters. And the showrunners further compound the issue by not following the canon of the story. So diehard Lord of the Rings fans, who should be their target audience, aren't watching this. They can't even enjoy it. And I have to say, based on what I saw in episode 3 and 4, I am fully convinced that Tolkien is the only thing holding this up. Even if for the fact that Rings of Power is loosely based on his works, we all know for a fact that this show would not be getting a fraction of the attention if it wasn't for him. I'm not here to needlessly hate on the show. There's enough of that. This is just honestly how I feel watching it. The novelty of experiencing a new show and watching it for the first time and getting to experience all the new things, all the new characters, it's kind of wearing off on me. So yes, as of right now, the Rings of Power is just barely keeping my interest. And I feel like with the $500 million production, I should not be saying that. So that's my honest opinion about this show. Episode 3 and 4, they were a low point for me. I think episode 1 is still my favorite. But again, that's really not saying that much. I would probably rate 3 and 4 kind of near the same level as 2, which is not that good. But please let me know what you guys think about the show so far, or where you think it's headed. The next time I talk about Rings of Power, it won't be until the very end, until the season finale. Then I'm going to give a whole entire review of the entire series, the entire season 1. And again, thank you to everyone who's been watching my videos. This has actually been a lot of fun. Thank you for everyone commenting, liking, disliking, whatever. It's been great. But Andor is up next because I didn't even know that this was coming out, and I really want to see it because I love Star Wars, and I have a feeling that this won't be that good because who wanted an Andor series? I don't know who greenlit that. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.